thought I was retired, but living in the Bay Area, we had really bad wildfires, and that was the catalyst for me. Like, maybe I have one more startup in me, and it's got to be focused on kind of fighting the climate crisis. The future is electrification, renewability, and nuclear as well, but it needs massive innovation across the stack. And this is deep tech. It's not just software; it's actual hardware. You literally just have to pick them up. And with new technology, the technology that we have invented, which is different to everybody else's, we can do it in a way that preserves and maintains the habitat. Take Indonesia, where most of the world's nickel is now mined, and you destroy a huge rainforest. So we think there's a better way, and that's what Impossible Metals is focused on. In Indonesia, there's child labour, there's forced labour, but all of this will increase. We think harvesting from the seabed with new technology that preserves the habitat is by far the better way to go.
And if you think about it, these people or these mines that primarily uses forced laborers or child laborers, they're not gonna be thinking about how it affects the environment.
If you're using selective harvesting and AI to only remove 30%, you'll have a very different.
Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we delve into the ever-changing and accelerating pace of global change and its impact on our lives. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, broadcasting live from the New World Studio. Today, we're diving into the world of AI and automation. As an enthusiast and expert in lead generation, I will guide you through understanding and leveraging these technologies for your business and for your personal use. And don't forget, AI and automation might be unstoppable forces, but that doesn't mean you are powerless. Tune in to learn how to make them work for you and not the other way around. But first, let's meet our guest. Welcome to the New World Podcast, where we navigate the changing world around us. I'm your host, John Paul Flores, specializing in lead generation and AI automation, here to help you understand how our world is changing and what it means for you. In this episode, we're joined by Oliver Gunasekara, CEO of Impossible Metals, a leader in sustainable deep sea mining. With over 30 years of experience in tech, including key roles in ARM success, Oliver is now focused on changing the way we source critical minerals for a greener future. And let me tell you right now, genuinely, their technology is fascinating. Oliver, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
By the way, before we begin on the in-depth questions, because I do have some, do you mind giving us a quick intro on who Oliver is? What's your experiences, expertise, and what keeps you busy these days?
Yeah, I grew up in the UK. I've worked hard to keep my British accent, although I've spent now 19 years here in California, in the Silicon Valley Bay Area. But yeah, I went to school in the UK, did electrical and electronic engineering, worked at a few companies, mainly in the semiconductor space, as a field applications engineer. Got an opportunity to join a small startup in Cambridge in the UK. And that company was ARM, which was a great rocket ship. So I joined it when it was about 60 people, did a bunch of roles, kind of business development, promotion of marketing into the mobile space. And my last job there was the corporate VP of business development, where I was looking at both investing and acquiring startups, and did a few transactions. ARM became public, was now a few thousand people. And then I got the bug to go back and join a startup. So ARM had moved me to Silicon Valley. So I left ARM, joined a startup, actually one I had invested in. That company was acquired, worked at some other startups as a consultant, and then ultimately founded a company called NG Codec, which was doing next generation video. That company got acquired by AMD in 2019. Then I thought I was retired, but living in the Bay Area, we had really bad wildfires, and that was the catalyst for me. Like, maybe I have one more startup in me, and it's got to be focused on kind of fighting the climate crisis. And so that ultimately led to Impossible Metals.
You know, what's fascinating about your story is that you have a deep fascination about being on a startup or doing a startup yourself. Do you mind letting us know why that's the case?
I like creating from nothing to something, the zero to one journey. That's what really excites me. From you just have an idea, and then you form a team, you raise money, you develop a product, you find customers, you raise money, and ultimately, hopefully, have a big exit. And I just really enjoy that building something from nothing, identifying a problem, coming up with a solution, and then ultimately, hopefully, having a success.
In your experiences, do you find that it's more enjoyable to build something instead of sustaining it?
Absolutely. I mean, different people have different motivations. It's part of the reasons why I left ARM after it got to a few thousand people and was public. I really enjoyed it. I learned so much in the early days. But when a company becomes more mature, it's about repeat business, it's about processing, it's a bit of bureaucracy, innovation slow. It's less interesting for me. I like building from nothing, getting your first customer, getting your first deal, building your first product. That's what really excites me personally. But you need people to do the 1 to 2 as well as the 0 to 1.
It's amazing. In Impossible Metals, you're deeply connected with deep tech and climate tech. What unique opportunities do you think these two things offer, and why should people look more into it?
Well, I think most people would admit that we are in a
Yeah,
climate crisis. We do
yeah.
need to have a transition away from oil and gas. It needs to be managed, it needs to take some time, but ultimately we need to end our dependency on fossil fuels. Coal, oil, gas, and the future is electrification, renewability. I think nuclear as well, but it needs massive innovation across the stack. And this is deep tech. It's not just software; it's actual hardware, it's actual atoms. And so I think there are many business opportunities, but also opportunities to do good. And one of the things that we established with Impossible Metals is that it's a B corporation, a public benefit corporation. So it is a for profit. We are there absolutely to make money for our shareholders, but we also have a public benefit, which in our case is delivering sustainably sourced critical minerals to the supply, to the market. And I think I would encourage others to look at that structure because it allows you to have for profit, but also allows you to bake in the fact that you have a public benefit as well.
Can you share an example on how actually Impossible Metals help still get these resources that companies need to create these fascinating products, but also sustain the environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned, we are in an energy transition. That transition is primarily away from fossil fuels to electrification, but electrification needs metal. You need metal to move the electricity or to store the electricity in the form of a battery. And so, if you read all the reports out there from the World Bank, the International Energy Association, and others, we're talking about 500 to 600% more mining is needed over the next few years, maybe the next couple of decades, to get to net zero. And the problem is how we get that mining has a big environmental impact. In time, maybe in 20 to 30 years, we may be able to recycle significant quantities, but there just isn't enough available in supply. And if you buy a new Tesla today, it's probably at least 10 to 15 years before the battery will be recycled. So we need primary mining. We have to extract these metals. And today we go to our planet on the land and we dig them out of the ground. And the problem is we've been doing this for millennium. So the end result is what's left in the ground is pretty poor assets. It's low grade, it's very remote. And so it's becoming very expensive. It's very environmentally destructive because you have lots of people associated with that mine, people that live there, people that get polluted by the offtake and from the processing of the minerals and the environment. Many of these metals are in rainforest regions like Indonesia, where most of the world's nickel is now mined. So you destroy a huge rainforest. So we think there's a better way, and that's what Impossible Metals is focused on.
That's amazing. And do you mind letting us know what's the most common misconception people have about deep sea mining? Because I believe some people, if not a lot of people, criticize it for its possible effects on how it could change the biodiversity of the ocean floor. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest view out there is that if we don't do deep sea mining, there's no impact. if we don't do deep sea mining, there is massive impacts in Africa, in Indonesia. There is child labor, there's forced labor, there's, and all of this will increase. So it's not as simple as saying, let's leave the deep sea alone without any consequences. There are massive consequences of doing that. And that's what I think most people get wrong. Now, I understand the argument. We've kind of destroyed the land for mining. Now, let's not go to a new area that is pristine, that we have not yet mined, and let's destroy that as well. I fully get that argument, but it's very simplistic. The first thing to say is the amount of life on the deep ocean where we're considering to do mining. This is between 4 and 6 kilometers, so 3 to 4 miles deep. There's no sunlight. There's no plant life or seaweed of any form because there's no sunlight that gets there. There is life, but the majority of it is actually bacteria. There is
Yeah.
bigger forms of life, but it's very, very rare. It's what we call megafauna, something maybe over a centimeter in size. This is incredibly rare, but you do find worms, you find a species of octopus, some crabs, you have corals, you have sponges. But typically, if you're looking at a video of the deep seabed, maybe every 100 one of these rocks would actually have some life we can visibly see. And so the beauty of the polymetallic nodules, which is the type of life that we are actually going after, is that they are just potato-sized rocks that just lie on the seabed floor. So there's no blasting or cutting involved in them. You literally just have to pick them up. And with new technology, the technology that we have invented, which is different to everybody else's, we can do it in a way that preserves and maintains the habitat. And I'd love to go, if it makes sense, further into our tech and why it's different. But if I'm allowed, for people that have the video, I will show a
Yeah.
little picture of what is the deep seabed so people can actually understand what it actually looks like.
Yeah. Sure.
So,
By the way, I have a follow up question on
yeah.
the answer that you gave. So technically, you're doing this mining at such a deep level, maybe 6 kilometers, as you said, down the waterbed that there's rarely any life to be destroyed or to be harmed to begin with.
So the majority of the life, if
Yeah.
you were to do it by weight, is
Yeah.
bacteria. And bacteria obviously doesn't weigh very much. So
Yeah.
there is corals, there are sponges, there are larger
Yeah.
forms of life, but it's very, very rare.
It's amazing.
Could I just show? I'm going to just play.
Yeah.
This is a short video of the actual seabed. So this is what it actually looks like. These are the potato-sized polymetallic nodules. And tell me when you see some life. Now, obviously, these all have bacteria, but it's pretty rare that you actually see
Yeah.
some larger forms of life. There are some in this video. I'll try and point them out when I see them. But there is. There's one here. You see this
Yeah.
bit here? But these are pretty rare. And that is the environment. And compare that to a rainforest in Indonesia that has massive carbon sinks, massive biodiversity, massive amounts of species, and a lot of people that live there.
Yeah.
It's just night and day different.
There's rarely any life. I mean, there's a few maybe red strings. I don't know what those are, but there's nothing here.
Yeah, and obviously some areas may have a little bit more.
Yeah.
What is here is bacteria, and the bacteria is very unique and special. And
Yeah.
in our strategy, we will leave 30% of all of the seabed and nodules behind
Yeah.
undisturbed. And there could be really good pharmaceutical benefits in the bacteria. Maybe there's a
Yeah.
cure for some form of cancer. So we don't want to vacuum it up and destroy it all. And so our technology is specifically designed to look for life. If we see the life, we avoid it. And even if we don't, we preserve at least 30% of the area.
What minerals can you actually get from a typical nodule that you manage to get from the sea?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, here you can see a picture of what one of these potato sized nodules look like. And they do contain the four metals that we find really valuable. So we have nickel, cobalt, copper, and manganese. And these are also very high grade. much higher than we typically find in new land-based deposits. So all four of these metals are actually used in batteries, but they're also
Yeah.
used in many other applications: nuclear power, solar, wind, stainless steel. Any application for stainless steel is using nickel as part of the alloy that goes into stainless steel.
That's amazing. It's incredible. And as you see here, 71% of the planet is oceans, so you have a much higher rate of ability to get these nodules on a much higher scale. Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in our planet, the vast majority of the planet is actually
yeah,
ocean. So 71% of the surface area of our planet is ocean, and only
yeah,
29% is land. And we've been mining forever. So the end result is what's left on
yeah.
land is not great, and we're always in competition with humans that also live on
Yeah.
the planet.
So then imagine if we manage to eliminate 100% or at least 80% of the land-based mining, how great that would be for just the environment that we can actually feel.
Yeah, and I think we're probably
Yeah,
not going to stop existing mines because mines
yeah,
take a lot of capital, and once they're operational, they
yeah,
typically have, excuse me, a long life, 20, 30, 40 years of life. But the World Bank, the IEA says we need thousands of new mines to open
yeah,
to allow us to get to net zero. We think the vast majority of these mines do not need to open on land; they can open in
yeah,
the ocean. And we think because the resource is so large in the ocean and the costs
yeah,
are going to be so low to extract, it will not
yeah.
be economic or environmentally acceptable to open new mines for nickel and cobalt once deep sea mining scales.
In terms of what oceans can you actually extract these resources from, I believe that on our previous conversation, you told me it's mainly on the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, there are multiple oceans where this is available. Let me see if I can
Yeah,
share the screen again. So here you can see this is the major locations for nodules. Now there are other
yeah,
types of deep sea minerals that, for instance, Norway is focused on. What I would call the vent systems and the crust systems, but not
yeah,
nodules. But if you talk about nodules, this area called the CCZ, or the Clarendon-Clipperton Zone, between Hawaii and Mexico, this is the biggest area. It has the most
yeah,
research and has over 19 licensed areas. But you see
yeah,
Brazil having nodules now in their own waters, as does India, as does Japan, as does
yeah,
Sweden, American Samoa, and Cook Islands. So all of these have been identified, and the governments
yeah.
are in various stages of licensing the minerals so that people can start to do the marine research and then extract them.
Is this the locations that they've managed to find, or are there locations that they've managed to explore but wasn't able to actually find these resources from?
So this is where the prospecting has been done over the last 30 years.
Yeah,
So these areas we know how much is there. It's
yeah.
estimated globally the ocean has something like $100 trillion worth of metals. So it's a
Wow.
large amount, enough to maybe electrify all forms of transportation, not just cars, but trucks, ships,
Yeah,
and in the future planes as energy density of batteries improve. So there's very, very large amounts. But of course, the ocean has not been extensively surveyed,
yeah.
only in certain locations. So I suspect there is a lot more. But this is what has already been discovered.
And I noticed that most of them are near the equator. Is there a factor that plays in?
I don't think so. The factors that are needed is that you need the water to be water for millions of years. And so that typically means deep water because
Yeah,
our continental shelves move. And so that's one of the reasons why it's deep. You need the right oxygen levels, the right solidity levels. There are other characteristics that are needed for the geography to form. But, the nodules do vary. The ones in the Cook Islands and American Samoa are smaller, more dense, and be more cobalt rich. The ones in the Clarendon Clipperton zone tend to be larger and more nickel rich.
yeah. Do you mind showing us what your technology actually looks like? The Eureka one, the two.
Yeah, let me show you a picture of that. Let me give me 1 second here. So I'm going to kind of show the roadmap here. So when we first formed the company,
Yeah,
we basically researched how could we do it better? How could we avoid the dredging technology that everyone else is doing, that is vacuuming up the seabed and using a riser system? And we came up with an architecture that basically uses autonomous robots that move up and down the water column. They don't land, they hover, and they use computer vision and AI to pick up the nodules, and they look for life. If we see life, we don't disturb it. And the goal here is to also leave 30% behind. So that was the architecture. And if you want, there's for the show notes, there's a
yeah,
short 60-second video of how that works. But what we did was build the first piece of that technology, which was the robotic arm and vision system. So we built that in and tested it and demonstrated it in March of 22. So that was in a tank in the lab. We were able to kind of move the arm and pick up the rocks using the camera. Then we built Eureka One. So Eureka One is a small underwater robot. The technical term is an AUV, autonomous underwater vehicle. It's completely battery powered, and it was designed to go shallow depths. It had one arm, and it really proved the concept of a buoyancy system, an arm, and an AI vision. And we were successfully able to demonstrate that to a bunch of stakeholders in May of last year, 23. And then we've been working on Eureka 2. Now, Eureka 2 is significantly larger. It has three arms, but more critically, it's now rated at 4 miles depth. So it can go real ocean depths. And we've actually done testing at in the ocean off Florida. And so, it's a pretty sophisticated vehicle. I can show a better picture of it, which I would have here. Give me 1 second. Yeah.
I think one of the best part of your technology is the fact that you can actually autonomously just pick the right amount of these nodules and leave the actual life alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to show a very short video. This is brand new. We just shot this. This is using our AI algorithms. So what you're seeing here is this is from our test tank, but you see the vision system identifying the nodules, but it's now identifying the life, and it's putting a green circle around the life. And so anything inside that green circle will not be disturbed. And this all happens in real time, live on the vehicle. So it's a way of detecting the life. And it's looking for anything that is not a nodule. So it knows about seabed, it knows about nodule. Anything else, it
Yeah.
assumes is life. And so we avoid detecting it.
Does it mean that any nodule, the one on the red squares that is within the range of the green circles, will not be also touched?
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly how it works. And we could
That's
adjust the
amazing.
radius of the green circle. That's a software, it's one line of code. So we can make these bigger or smaller. But in addition, we always want to leave 30% behind anyway,
Yeah,
because that's good for biodiversity.
it's amazing. I think that completely eliminates the argument where you can actually harm life, because showing this and that there's an actual radius on which you don't touch any nodules close to the actual life just shows how much you actually care about not destroying or even just touching any of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to, if I may, I'll show one other video that we just shot last week, which is the vehicle actually in the harbor
Yeah,
picking. So here you can see this is actual vehicle in shallow water picking up nodules using its three arms.
is
And
that the
we, sorry, John, say again.
real speed of the arms, or has it been
Yes, this
slowed?
is real speed. We continue to optimize. We have a more advanced software release that we haven't yet pushed to the
yeah.
robot that actually goes about 30% faster. But
You know,
but
that's
still,
incredible.
yeah, yeah. And for us, we're always trying to optimize three things: speed, accuracy, and minimize the sediment disturbance. So right
Yeah,
now, our focus historically has been on speed and accuracy. I think the accuracy here is really high. Speed is pretty good, but we will now start to optimize for minimizing sediment disturbance. And you'll notice that the claw, the end effector at the end of the arm, it's kind of dragging the seabed as it picks
yeah,
up.
yeah,
I think in time we'll be able to optimize that so it engages with less of the seabed and also the movement. We could move directly down instead of diagonally. So there are things we will do to improve the sediment disturbance, but already this is a real live system that is working really well.
yeah. That's incredible. Imagine the scale of Eureka 3 and especially the Eureka 4 because the Eureka 3, as it shows on your slide, can get 100 tons
Yeah,
every 3 hours, 3 or 4, I don't know, forgot.
yeah,
But yeah, it's
yeah. I
incredible.
mean, yeah, Eureka 3 is the production size system. And so it has a payload of
Yeah, of
4
course.
metric tons, and it can deliver that every 3 hours. And so in time, we might have a fleet of, say,
Yeah,
100 of these operating concurrently. And so we can ultimately deliver millions of tons of nodules.
yeah. And just for anyone who's listening, every 3 hours includes the maintenance, the refueling, or any other maintenance that they need to be done. So actually, just collect the payload, drop them on wherever they store them, and actually get the Eureka tree back on the seabed. That's how much it
Yeah,
takes. That's how long.
yeah,
It's incredible.
yeah. So, basically, the mission
Yeah,
starts with Eureka 3 being put into the water, the launch. Then we have the
yeah,
dive. Then we have the collection on the seabed floor. Then we have
yeah,
the surfacing, the recovery, the picking up of the
yeah,
robot onto the ship. We have the battery swap, the payload empty, the maintenance, and now the vehicle can be reused again. And all of that fits into three
yeah.
hours.
Can you talk more about the just the changes or innovations between Eureka 2 and 3?
Yeah, there's basically no changes. It's all the same technology, but bigger. So we
Yeah,
go from 3 arms to 11 arms. We go from a small amount of buoyancy propulsion to much larger buoyancy, more
yeah,
buoyancy spheres, and we are also moving away from syntactic
yeah,
foam, which is the yellow material on Eureka 2 that provides a lot of buoyancy. It's static, but we're moving to spheres that provide the same equivalent buoyancy.
yeah.
Really, not any new technology, just building a bigger version.
Yeah. And can you talk more about how the technology or the machine actually functions underwater? Does it use purely electricity? Does it do use any gas or any fossil fuel, or does it run completely on electricity,
It's
meaning it would
yeah,
be less destructive?
it's purely battery powered, so it's electrically
Yeah,
operated. That's the only power source. The
yeah,
big use of the power are the buoyancy system. So that's a unique design that we've patented that allows the
yeah,
vehicle to move up and down the water column. We do that by having spheres that we pump water in and out of to make the vehicle
yeah,
heavier or lighter, so it floats or sinks.
yeah,
That's a big use of energy. The second big use of energy is the motors for the robotic arm. So we have 4 motors on each arm, one for each limb, plus the claw, the end effector. So
yeah,
those are the big energy uses. The smaller energy uses are for the sensors. We have cameras, we have an NVIDIA compute board, we
yeah,
have acoustic communication. It's called USBL. When on the surface, we have satellite communication, we have Wi Fi, and
yeah,
we have a whole bunch of sensors. But yeah, fundamentally, it's a bit like an electric vehicle, an electric car. It's just designed to survive at the pressures of 6 kilometers or
yeah.
4 miles. So 600 times the atmosphere pressure.
And for people wondering why the depth from Eureka 2 and 3 has not been changed like Eureka 1 and 2, I believe, as you said on our last call, that most of the oceans that you see these potato-shaped nodules are on the 6 kilometer depth.
Yeah, I mean, to our knowledge, all of the nodules are formed at the abyssal plains, which are
Yeah,
between 4 and 6 kilometers depth. So, by
yeah,
making a vehicle that can work at 6 kilometers, 4 miles deep, we cover all known nodule fields. So we don't
yeah,
need to go bigger. The primary difference is just really the size, and that's
yeah.
what you need for a commercial harvesting operation.
And as you mentioned earlier, there's a huge deficit right now on the minings that needs to be done. If all of these nodule fields are currently being harvested, theoretically, let's say all of them is now being operated, there's a lot of mining being done. How much of that deficit can actually be sufficed?
The size of the mineral resources in the ocean is much larger, orders
Yeah,
of magnitude bigger than land-based reserves. So I think in time
yeah,
we can start to supply all of the world's nickel and cobalt
yeah,
from ocean. You know, some estimates are that it's like $100 trillion
yeah,
worth of metals in the ocean. Definitely enough to electrify all forms of road transport for the
yeah,
next 100 years and potentially further. But you know, given economics, I don't expect existing land-based mines to close,
yeah.
but I don't expect new land-based mines for nickel and cobalt to open once
Yeah.
the deep sea minerals start to become mainstream.
No, most of your nodules are nickels and cobalts, and for every 3 hours you get 4 tons of it. Can you talk about, let's say, if we try and get 4 tons of that resources on a land-based mining, how much damage more it could be doing?
Yeah, this is really a conversation around grade
Yeah,
because grade determines when you dig up the ore how much of it is valuable and how much is waste. And historically on land, we could find high grade material, 5% or more of the ore was nickel and 95% was waste. But that's like 50 years ago. These days, for new deposits, we're typically looking at a fraction of a percent, 0.2, 0.3%. So you have to remove massive quantities of material. So if we take nickel, it's probably coming from Indonesia, right below the rainforest. So you literally have to deforest a whole area, dig up the ore, process the ore, and that processing is using a process called HPAL, high pressure acid leaching. So you grind the ore, you expose it to pressure, you roast it at very high temperatures, typically with coal power, and then you leach it with sulfuric acid. That's how you separate. And all you're releasing is 0.2, 0.3, 0.5%. The rest is waste and then has to be stored in what's called tailings. And that today is dry stacked. And of course, if there is rain, then the acid runs off. If there is seismic activity, this can damage. And unfortunately, this acid then gets into the traditional rivers. It pollutes the fish. It has impacts to humans. So you know it's really bad. And you know because the grade is 16 times higher, equivalent grade. Your economics are so much better, and you need such less removal of material out of the ground.
for someone who doesn't know anything about mining, in my perception, I think most people think that once you actually get this, once you get inland mining, once you get these ores, you just need to separate the valuable minerals from the dirt. So, in terms of real value, what you need to actually do is not just the forest, you also need to mine and also put very harmful chemicals to actually just get these very small amounts of our sources that you can just easily get via your technology at a much higher potency.
Absolutely. And, you know, many mines on land have to be
Yeah,
quite deep or they have to use tunnels. And
yeah,
that's also difficult. And even estimating the resource on land is very
yeah,
complex because these mineral reserves, they're three dimensional. So they dig boreholes and they try to map how the three dimensional system works underground.
yeah,
but it's not always accurate. And so, you have to have huge amount of environmental disruption, social disruption,
yeah,
tunneling. In the Congo, where most of the cobalt comes from, about a third of all mining is using people, so-called artisanal mining. Some of
yeah,
them forced, some of them child labor.
yeah,
And you can imagine people digging in a tunnel for
yeah.
$1 to $2 a day to extract ore. It's pretty bad. We think harvesting from the seabed with new technology that preserves the habitat is by far the better way to go.
And if you think about it, these people or these mines that primarily uses forced laborers or child laborers, they're not gonna be thinking about how it affects the environment. They're not gonna be replanting the trees after they damage or collected the ores that they take. They're just gonna leave it at that.
That's absolutely correct. And then another topic that no one talks about is there's a large
Yeah,
amount of illegal mining. So in
yeah,
theory, mining should be highly regulated. There should be a lot of environmental studies and environmental impact assessment that's done before any mining is done, and then the mining should follow
yeah,
the plan that was approved. But in many geographies, there is corruption. People
yeah,
bribe
absolutely.
officials, and suddenly, if there was a village where the cobalt mine is, suddenly soldiers turn up, people are forced off the mine, and the mine starts to operate under no supervision or control, so called illegal mining. That's a
Yeah,
large amount. It happens all the time, and again, is not really talked about.
yeah, absolutely. And if your technology is as good as you say it is, and it is actually good. I mean, I've seen the videos that you showed earlier. Most of these mines would be genuinely not be needed in the future, and there's a lot of injustices that would be just gone.
Yeah, I mean, I think illegal mining should definitely not happen. It's just
Yeah,
terrible, the impact it has to the environment and to
yeah,
social to people. But even approved land-based mines, take
yeah,
Indonesia. Many of these mines are actually approved, but
yeah,
the environmental standards and the social standards are very, very different to what we have in the West. And have actually caused many mines in Australia to kind of
yeah,
go into care and maintenance because they can't compete. They're just much lower cost. And then the final thing I want to touch on is there's a whole geopolitical angle here that
yeah,
China has been very smart and actually invested a lot of capital in Africa and Indonesia.
yeah,
It now owns something like 70% of the critical mines.
yeah,
And that's a problem because China has shown that they can weaponize that. There was a dispute with Japan
yeah,
over an island. And as a result of that dispute, China basically turned off supply of rare earth elements.
yeah,
And that really hit the Japanese economy. And we don't want
yeah,
to be in a situation where Europe or North America is at the whim of China turning on or off the supply of critical minerals. So we need our own independent source. And
yeah,
the ocean, I believe, is the best option. It's large, it's cheap to extract, and we can do
yeah.
it quickly, unlike land based mines, because nobody wants a mine in their backyard.
Yeah, absolutely. And to touch on the injustices part, I think many people just turn a blind eye on these injustices just because of the fact that we do actually need these ores. But if you can manage to and have managed to create not just a better way in terms of environment and for the people, but also a way to get more, I think that's gonna remove that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what other industries are the most dependent from the ores that you're actually extracting?
So, it depends by ore because we have
Yeah,
four, and that gives us somewhat isolation.
yeah,
So, nickel, cobalt, copper, manganese.
yeah,
So, if we talk about nickel, the majority of nickel today goes into the stainless steel market. So, wherever you use stainless steel, that's the biggest consumption of nickel. Batteries are growing quite rapidly, and so that's another big market. And then nickel is a specialized alloy that's used all over defense, all over specialized equipment, nuclear power, etc. So nickel has very wide uses. Cobalt is used in batteries, so that's probably the biggest market. But it is also a very specialized alloy, heavily used in defense, in nuclear power, also in other specialized areas. Copper's used wherever there's electricity. So if you have any infrastructure that moves a grid, a charging network that moves electricity, use copper. And copper is in huge demand. In fact, I saw a statistic. We need to mine more copper in the next, I think, 25 years than we've mined since humans began. And, copper is such an important metal. We have the Bronze Age, which is, copper and tin. And it was fundamental to human civilization. So coppers are massively important. And then manganese. Manganese is beginning to be used in batteries, but it's also used in steel making and many other applications as well.
I have a question about nodules. Because you said modules primarily contains four main different minerals. Are there other variants of nodules that contains other type of metals, or is there just this one?
So what we find is that in a given location on the seabed floor, the
Yeah,
grade and the four metals is uniform. But if you move from, say, the Clarendon Clipperton area, which is close to Hawaii, if you go a long way south, like 6 hours flight south to, say, the Cook Islands, then you get the same metals, but the percentages is different. So in the Clarendon Clipperton zone, you tend to get higher nickel and less cobalt. Whereas in the Cook Islands area, the nodules tend to be more round, denser, and happen to have more cobalt and less nickel. But they also hold copper and manganese. So you always get the four metals, but the
yeah.
ratio of them by macro location does vary.
As you said, we have a huge demand in copper and other minerals. Can you talk more about what's the possible effects if we weren't able to find ways to actually supply those demands?
So the question is like on substitution. What could we do if we couldn't get nickel and cobalt and copper?
Or what's the effects? What industries could be highly damaged, or what can, effects that could be bad for
Yeah.
humanity if we can't get those resources?
Well, I think fundamentally we'll never get to net zero. We'll never move off fossil fuels because
Yeah,
uh, all of the technologies that we're using, whether it's wind, solar, geothermal, nuclear, hydro, all of these need these metals. And
yeah,
the biggest trend is electrification. And electrification is so dependent on all of these metals. Batteries
yeah,
are probably the area that is growing the fastest. The majority of a EV actually has nickel-based chemistries.
yeah,
There are other chemistries that people are beginning to use, but they have compromises. They have much
yeah,
less range because they're heavier. So
yeah,
I think fundamentally we will not have a just energy transition without seabed minerals. That's my
yeah.
personal view.
It's amazing. And since we're nearing the end of the podcast, do you have any advice for anyone who might be interested in joining or starting a startup since you have a lot of experience there?
Yeah, I think identify a problem. That's key. And I think I would encourage people to look at climate tech, deep tech. I think try to balance three things: something that's good for the planet, it has good financial returns,
Yeah,
it's a big market. And for me, it's technically interesting. It's doing something that's never been done before. It's trying to build something new. And I think if you have all three, then you can really attract very strong individuals to come and join the team and make that happen. And so that's what I would look for. All three, good for the planet, big market, good financial returns, and a lot of innovation, new technology that needs to
yeah.
be invented.
I think some people thinks that if you move on the side of good for the planet, not a lot of investors are gonna come in. But just in seeing the type of companies that are emerging, I genuinely believe that investors are looking for a safer way to genuinely invest their money, not just for the return of their money, but also for the environment.
Yeah, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think
Yeah,
there are now a lot of venture funds focused on climate tech. I think you can deliver strong
yeah,
financial returns whilst also delivering, technology that helps a just energy transition. I mean, I
yeah,
think Tesla is probably the poster child of this. they are helping to electrify, road transportation. But yet, I think they have one of the highest market caps of any deep tech company around.
And if there's anyone who might be interested in looking more and learning more about Impossible Metals or what you do, where can they find you?
Yeah, I think our website is the best place, impossiblemetals.com. We have videos on there. We have an FAQ.
Yeah,
We have a quite active blog site, and we can give the address for the show notes, and we also have a YouTube channel which has a lot of this material as well.
amazing.
I would
And
also Yeah, let me one other plug would be LinkedIn. So we're pretty
yeah,
active on LinkedIn. Again, Impossible Metals. That's kind of where we publish a lot of the material that we create. It's probably hosted on our website, but we notify people via LinkedIn. So if you're interested, please follow us on LinkedIn.
and you also have a newsletter because I saw that you have one.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me. I forgot about that. Yeah, we do have a newsletter. You can sign up on our website. That's another good resource, and we also have monthly webinars, which are typically recorded live with
Yeah,
presentations and Q&A, and then they're archived on our YouTube channel.
amazing. And do you have any last message or announcements to anyone who might be listening?
I would say have an open mind around deep sea minerals. There's a lot written in the press about how terrible this industry is, but what isn't written is what it's trying to replace, which is the land based mining. And so I think if you call for a moratorium or a pause on deep sea mining, you're inherently calling for more child labor, more forced
Yeah,
labor, more environmental destruction, and that's without you realizing there are
yeah.
consequences of this.
And just with Impossible Metals, I see a lot more pros than cons that it has, genuinely.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the older technology, the dredging tractor and riser system, it was invented 50 years ago, and we really decided from a clean sheet of paper, how could we make our system significantly less expensive, have no single points of failure, and
Yeah,
preserve the marine habitat. And I think that's what new technology and AI has enabled. And so again, I think, when you consider an application of deep sea minerals, you have to factor in what tech is being used. Because many years ago, people proposed to use a nuclear bomb to do mining. I think we would all agree that would be outrageous. But of course, the impact is completely dependent on what tech you
yeah,
use. If you're using a dredging tractor and riser system, you will destroy all of the biodiversity that lives in that site. If you're using selective harvesting and AI to only remove 30%, you'll have a very different impact.
amazing. And again, I want to thank you for joining us on the New World Podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity.
That's all for today's episode of the New World Podcast. We have explored some fascinating topics with our amazing guests, shedding light on the upcoming New World. If you enjoyed today's episode and today's discussion and want to stay updated the future episodes, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to the podcast. And if you found value on what we have discussed, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Remember, if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or if you are interested in being a guest in the future, please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or email me at john.paul@aicinix.com and add New World Podcast, all capital, in the subject line so I can see it. I always love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to check out our amazing guests. You can find more information about them via the contact details we provided earlier. Again, thank you for tuning in on the New World Podcast. I know your time is very important, and I try to always make the next episode better than the last. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, keep innovating. This is John Paul Flores signing off from the New World Podcast.